guest, as Jackson said just a minute ago. There's a Connect card in the back of the pew in front of you. If you fill that out for us, we would appreciate that very, very much this morning. So here's the question that we've been asking over the last few weeks that we're going to do today, and next week we're going to ask again one more time before we're on to something different. But what drives you? What is it that gets you up in the morning and just lights your fire and gets you going? Because it's an important question for you to be able to answer, because there are some things that motivate us that are not good, that you should change. There are some things, though, that motivate us that can be a blessing to us. So a couple of weeks ago, we looked at the Apostle Paul. You know, Paul was this amazing guy. He got to see Jesus there on the Damascus Road. Incredible encounter that he had with Jesus. And yet he writes this in the New Testament. He says, I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings. And so even though Paul knew Christ, he's praying and saying, I just want to know him. I want to know more about him. I want to know the depths of God, even though he knew he couldn't, get to that point. There was more to God that he wanted to know. And so there's a lot of things that drove Paul, but that was one of the main things. He's like, I know him, but I want to know him even more. And so just knowing God was one of the things that drove Paul in his life. So then we talked about Peter a couple of weeks ago. Now, Peter was one of these people that just lived a life of highs and really incredible lows too. The guy walked on water. I mean, that's an amazing thing. He was able to be with Jesus up on the Mount of Transfiguration and see Jesus changed into his glorious body. I don't know what that looks like. He tried to explain it, but that was an amazing thing. He got to be with Jesus and James and John in the inner part of the garden where Jesus was praying. He got to go into a room where this girl had died. Jesus raises her from the dead. Peter got to experience some incredible things in his life, but then he had some lows too, didn't he? You remember Jesus says that I'm the Christ and I'm going to suffer, I'm going to be handed over, and 3 days later I'm going to rise from the dead. Peter said, hold on. Oh, hold on, man. That's not never, Lord. That is not going to happen with you. Jesus looks at Peter and tells him, get behind me, Satan. Now, I don't know how that would strike you if your best friend in the whole world calls you Satan, but that's a low point for Peter. And then the other one, where Peter denies Jesus, says, hey, if you go to the cross, I'm going to die too. Man, I'm with you to the very end. And yet he denies him 3 times. And so Peter had these really high mountaintop experiences in his life, and he had these really low points in his life as well. But here's what drove Peter, was both the highs and the lows. Was both the really good stuff in his life and the really difficult things in his life. And God uses those things in our lives too, right? I mean, those mountaintop experiences where you just you could sense the presence of God just right there next to you. And it was an incredible thing that you experienced and that you felt, and you remember those moments in your life, and they drive you, they move you, they motivate you to be good, to do good, right? But then there's those times in our lives where we fail, too. Kind of like Peter. I mean, we've denied Christ. We've not been faithful all the time. We've done things, been things that just we're not proud of. There's regret in our life. But those move us too, don't they? Because we look back to those and we think, I don't ever want to do that again. I don't ever want to make that mistake again in my life. And so we come to this realization that God really does use all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Both the really high mountaintop experiences and also the really low points where we would just rather forget those things and move on. Last week, looked at Moses. So Moses, what was the big event in Moses' life? It just kind of kicked off all the other big events in his life. He was shepherding his sheep, and there's this bush, and it's on fire, but it's not consumed. And so he turns aside to go look at this. God speaks to him from the bush, and he issues a call to Moses. You go to Pharaoh, you let my people go. Tell him that he needs to let my people go. And so everything that happened in Moses' life from that point on was in affirmation of the call. It was in support of the call. It was a reminder of the call. Everything hinged on that call of God in his life. And so just as Moses had a call, and that's what drove him, you have a call on your life too. This isn't just about pastors or deacons or other people who serve as missionaries or counselors. I mean, every single one of us have a call. We looked in Ephesians chapter 4 last week when it says this, that you are to live a life that is worthy of the calling that you have received. And he says, do this in humbleness and gentleness and kindness. And he explains how to do that. But every single one of us have a call on God in our life to live our lives in a manner that is worthy of the call that God has. And so that's one of the things that ought to drive you, to motivate you, to move you in this life. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take a step back from Moses and look at the guy who was his right-hand man. I love Joshua. I love the book of Joshua. It's an incredible story of a guy who is faithful to God and how God, man, just does some incredible things through his life. So Joshua, what was it that Joshua was driven by? And when you read kind of Exodus, because there's a lot of Joshua in Exodus, you read the book of Joshua, there's obviously a lot of Joshua in that one. When you look at Joshua's life and you ask the question, what was it that drove him? Here's what I think it was. That it was vision that drove him. That he was driven by vision. Now, if you look at his life, you can kind of categorize his life in 3 different periods. And roughly it follows the ages that he was. And so from birth to about 40 years, that's his early life. And in his early life, he was driven by this vision to be free. Okay? Because he was a slave. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And then in his middle life, about 40 to 80 or so, there was this middle ages in his life. And then he was driven by this vision for what the future could be. And then the later part of his life, from about 80, 85 to about 110, the last 25 years of his life, he was driven by a vision to finish what he had started, really what God had started in his life. And so if you think about just the early years in Joshua's life, you think about what happened with him and what created this vision to be free for him. He was born as a slave in Egypt. Now think about this. I mean, you kind of put yourself in their place and think through kind of how life was for him. As a child, he would sit at the dinner table with his mom and his dad, whatever other brothers and sisters that he had, and they would talk about how the day went. You see, his dad was a slave, and his mom was a slave, and he was a slave. And I would imagine that many of the conversations around the dinner table had to do with what happened that day. How the taskmasters and the slave masters had whipped his father. How they had maybe roughed up his mother. And how his mom and his dad would sit around the table and they would just kind of dream about what it would be like to be free. What it would be like not to have to get up every day and to make bricks for Pharaoh so that Pharaoh could build all of his cities. Now, I mean, none of us have ever lived in those situations in our life, but that's the household that Joshua grew up in. He would have heard and he would have sat around that table hearing the stories and then stopping to pray and to cry out to God and to say, God, please deliver us from the Egyptians and from the slavery. Because God says to Moses, the reason why I picked you at this time to go to Pharaoh is because the cry of my people have reached my ears. And I'm going to send you to deliver them. And so Joshua would have been around that table with his family crying out to God. He would have seen Moses ride or walk, I don't know what he did, into town. He would have heard about this guy that used to live here a really long time ago, and now he's come back and he's telling Pharaoh to let us go. He would have been an eyewitness to all the plagues there in the land of Egypt. The darkness and the hail and the locusts and the gnats and the lights and the water turning to blood. I mean, all that stuff, he would have seen it. He was part of the first Passover. His dad would have said, well, Moses said that we got to get a lamb. And we're going to take this lamb, and we're going to kill it, we're going to eat it all tonight because there's not going to be any left for tomorrow morning because we'll be gone. And we're going to take the blood and we're going to apply it to the doorposts of our home because when this plague comes through, it will pass over our house. We're going to do this in faith because as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And Joshua, that's how he's raised. That was the home in which he was raised. He was part of the group that went out to the Egyptians after all that and said, can I have your gold and silver? And they're like, yeah, here, take it, please leave. And he plundered, along with the rest of the Hebrews, the entire Egyptian nation. He would have seen that Red Sea divided and a wall of water on his right and his left and walk across that on dry ground. He would have seen the Egyptian army drowned by these walls that collapsed in on top of them. And so those were his early years. And so he had this vision to be free from the slavery in which he was caught. But then he kind of moves into this middle age period of his life, and his vision begins to change a little bit. It changes from this vision to be free to a vision of what the future might possibly could be, because they were free now. They weren't in Egypt anymore. They were now in the desert, and they were there, and he's thinking, I can't, this is exciting. I'm looking forward to this. He leads the first battle against this group called the Amalekites, and he defeats them. He's one of the 12 spies that Moses picks to go into the land and says, listen, I want you to go in there and check it out. He's one of those 12 that goes. He's one of the 2 that comes back and says, we can do this. The promised land is right there, and I can't wait until we have the opportunity of walking into it. This is going to be an amazing thing. And so he had this vision of what the future could be in his life. And not just for him and for his family, but for the entire nation of the Hebrews. And then you get into the later years of his life, and there's this new vision for him, and it's this vision to finish what had started and what God had begun. As God called to him, I want you to take this group of people into the promised land and conquer it. This is what it says in Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. It says, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, arise and go over this Jordan River, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them. To the people of Israel, every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given it to you just as I promised to Moses. No man is going to be able to stand before you all the days of your life. And just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. And so it was during the last 25 years of Joshua's life that God did the most work in him and through him. Through him and the army, they conquered 6 nations and 31 different kings as they conquered and stepped into this promised land that God had given to them. And so Joshua had this vision. He was driven by vision. Vision to be free, vision for what the future could be, and then vision to finish what God had begun in his life. And so how does that help us? Now, for every single one of us, some of these kind of apply with how old you are, kind of how long you've been walking with God, and some of them really don't. They're just kind of the ageless, you might say. But every single one of us need one of these visions in our life at different times in our life. Now, we're going to pause just for a moment from Joshua. We're going to come back to his story, but I want to just share you 3 things about vision. And the first thing is this, is that different seasons of your life are going to require different visions for you. Different seasons of your life are going to require different visions. Because, listen, if you're married, you don't have kids, that's a season of your life, and there's going to be a vision that goes along with that. You start adding children into your family, and guess what? That vision is going to change just a little bit. And then when the kids, when they move out of the house, they get a little bit older, they're off in college, they're getting married, having kids of their own, all of a sudden the vision that you had for raising your children and how life looked with kids in the house, all of a sudden vision looks a little bit different. But now you're in the middle of work and you're in the middle of your career. Then maybe the career comes to an end and you're thinking about, you're talking about, looking at retirement. Then all of a sudden vision begins to change again. So for different seasons in your life, there's going to be different visions for you. Second thing about vision is this, is that the transition from one season of vision to the next season of vision is not always real clean and crisp. I mean, you watch some of our high school seniors, we kind of acknowledged them a couple of weeks ago. When you get out of high school, you go into college, it's a different season of life. It is for you. But there's a lot of high school seniors, as they move out of high school into college, they struggle with that transition from this season of life to this season of life. They quit going to church. They don't follow God anymore. They don't know what they want to be or do or how they're going to dress anymore. I mean, just everything's kind of thrown to the wind. They don't know what to do. And there's this season of change in their life from high school to college. When you graduate college, it's another season of change. Like, wow, I got to grow up now. Is that true? Do I really have to go to work there's no spring break any longer? I mean, they're shocked by these things. And so there's these seasons of vision aren't always real clean and crisp. Sometimes they're blurry on the edges. You just don't want to get caught in a 10-year transition, okay? maybe 12 months is good. But that's just one of the things about vision. Third thing about vision is this, is that if you're a believer, if you're a follower of Jesus, then your vision is going to be his, okay? And I know the next question, you're like, well, I don't know what his is. Well, guess what? You got to go find out, okay? I can't tell you. Your mama can't tell you. Your friends can't tell you. You have to discover his vision for your life during that particular season. And the only way that happens is you walk with him and you seek him. If you don't walk with him and you don't seek him, you're not going to know what the vision is. It's the only way God reveals those things to you. So Joshua, going back to him for just a minute, had this vision of freedom. And so we should have a similar vision. Doesn't necessarily apply to all of us all the time, okay? But and again, we're not literally slaves, but here's the thing is that usually we get enslaved to something along the way. Maybe not to someone like the Egyptians, but to some things in our life. So how do you get free from those things? How do you have this vision of freedom for that time? Jesus says this over in the book of John chapter 8, verses 34 through 36. He says, truly, truly, I say to you, that everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. So it doesn't matter what you say. I mean, if you're doing something that you know is wrong, guess what? You are a slave to it. It doesn't matter if you say, well, I'm free and it doesn't have mastery over me. Yes, it does. But Jesus says if you practice it, that's what you're enslaved to. And so he says that the slave does not remain in the house forever. It means if you're a slave to sin, that's what you're practicing, you're not going to be a part of God's family. You got to have the Son. And the Son is the one who sets you free from those things. So he says the Son remains forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. So if it's freedom that you're after, the only way you discover real, true freedom in your life is through the Son. It's through Christ. Now, I mean, obviously that happens at salvation. There are sins in our life. We get caught up in these things. We need to be forgiven. We need God to come in and change our lives, so we receive him, we trust him. And there's a lot of things that we used to do, maybe lying and cheating and stealing. I don't know, whatever it is. The bad stuff that you already know what it is, but you don't necessarily want to give it up. Jesus is the one that sets you free from those things in your life. But I'll tell you this, even as believers, we get caught up with stuff, don't we? We do. We become slaves to the things that we practice. And the hard part for us is they may not necessarily be evil or bad, right? Sometimes they just enslave us. It could be food. It could be some of y'all out there with the politics right now with, Trump and Clinton and all the other things that are going on. I mean, the things that you practice are the things that you are enslaved to. It doesn't necessarily have to be what's bad. I told the group on Wednesday night a couple of weeks ago that I deleted off of my phone Fox News, Yahoo News, Bleacher Report. Y'all don't know what that is. That's like sports upstate. It's about things. And Facebook, okay? I just took them off my phone. They're not one click, and not even a click, just push away from me sitting down and reading it. Because literally Fox, I was like 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm reading it. About 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm reading it. Noon, I'm reading it. At lunchtime, and 2 o'clock, go catch up on the news. And at 5 o'clock, go home at night before I went to bed at night, go and read Fox News. I was more filled with Fox News than I was with the Spirit of God. You guys get more filled with Facebook and Instagram and Groupon, and I'm just all these Snapchat. It's crazy. I mean, think about how much time you spend, how many times you're looking at Facebook every single day. You're more filled with that stuff than you are with the Spirit of God. And those things enslave you. The things that you practice are what has mastered you in your life. And so I promise you there's more than those who just don't know Jesus that need to be set free this morning. And I remind you this, that Jesus, the Son, is the one who sets you free. That's it. That's the only answer that we have. And so you may need to have a vision today of just being set free from some stuff in your life. It may not necessarily be bad. It may be good, okay things, but you still need to be rid of it, okay? Second part of this vision is this, is that what could be, what the future might be, what the future might hold for you, what God might have for you in the days to come. That's what Joshua has. That's what we ought to have too. I mean, it really doesn't matter how old you are. Man, have a vision for the future. And again, if you don't know what that vision is, there's only one way to get it, and that's you following him, that's you seeking him. Because if you don't do those two things, I can't help you. You can come up with your own vision, and you probably will, just to fill the void, but it won't be his. and it won't be as satisfying as it could be and as it should be. So there's 4 takeaways from these middle years in Joshua's life while they were wandering around the desert. And he was looking forward to the promised land. 4 takeaways that I've got for you. Number 1 is this, is that vision is never a solo venture. Vision is never a solo venture. Listen, Joshua had this vision of the promised land, of what could be. First battle they fought was against the Amalekites. I mentioned that a minute ago. And so Joshua was the commander of the Lord's army. God is with them. But guess what? Joshua didn't win that battle by himself. I don't know if you've ever read the story before, but Moses is up on a mountain, and he's got a staff with him. And I don't know how it dawned on him. Maybe God told him. I don't know. But Moses figured out that when he had the staff up above his head, Joshua was winning the battle. But his arms got tired. He let the staff down. And as soon as he let the staff down, then Joshua started losing. He was like, man, this is killing me. I don't know what to do. And so Aaron and Hur, smart guys, they said, we'll hold your arms up for you. So you got Aaron on one side, Hur on the other side. They're holding Moses' arms up. And as long as his arms are up, Joshua's winning. Arms start to fall, Joshua's losing. They get a rock. They're like, here, Moses, sit on this. It's going to take a while. And so, but here's the thing. All of them had this vision of what the future could be, of that promised land that God had for them. But Moses wasn't going to get it alone. Neither was Aaron, neither was Hur, neither was Joshua, the military commander. Every one of them knew that they needed one another, and most importantly, they all understood that they needed God. That as long as that staff, which God had given to Moses, was a sign of God's presence with him, as long as that staff was up above Moses' head, that's when they were winning. So as you think about what the vision could be for your future, understand it's never a solo venture. You're never going to do it on your own. There's always going to be other people around you that God puts around you and with you, and it's going to be God that's leading the charge if it's his. Second takeaway is this, is that vision takes faith. It takes faith. Listen, there's going to be times in your life you're going to be like, I can't do this, and you're right, you can't. But there's no way we're ever going to make this. You can't by yourself. If you remember when Joshua and the other 11 spies went into the land, they came back. Now the 10 who convinced all the Hebrews not to do it, they weren't lying. The people in the land, they were bigger than the Hebrews. They were big people. I don't know how big they were, but they were big folks. The cities that were there, the walls, they were high walls. They were fortified cities. Everything those 10 unfaithful spies said was the truth, but they had no faith. They spoke in unbelief. They thought, you know what, there's no way we can do it. And they were right. But listen to what Joshua said, and Caleb. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes because of what the 10 were saying, and said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, the land which we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us out into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord. And do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread. We're going to eat them up. We're just going to devour them for us. Their protection is removed. God did that for them. And the Lord is with us, and so do not fear them. It takes faith for this vision for the future. And I'll add this, it takes courage too. I mean, we think, well, I have faith because I believe in Jesus. But understand this, it takes courage for you to act on those things you know you can't do on your own. It takes courage for you to be able to do that. And so understand and remember that. Number 3, takeaway is this, from Joshua's middle years, is that vision is going to require waiting. I mean, no vision that anybody has ever had, that God has ever given to anyone, did require some period of you waiting on God. Because when they went into the promised land and they came back and the 10 spies just convinced everybody else that hey, we can't do this, 40 years, Joshua, Caleb, and Moses wandered around in that desert, waiting for a generation of unfaithful people to die so that they could take possession of the vision that God said, I've got for you. It took 40 years. It took time for them to have to sit and wait. It says in Numbers 14, according to the number of days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, a year for each day. You shall bear your iniquity 40 years, and you shall know my displeasure. I, the Lord, have spoken. Surely this I will do to all this wicked congregation who are gathered together against me in this wilderness. They shall come to a full end, and there they shall die. And so I don't know what your vision is. Maybe it's to graduate from college. Maybe it's to get married, to have children, to have a great job, go into ministry, be a missionary. I don't know what the vision is that God has for you, but there's going to be a period of time where you are going to have to wait on God. Now, the temptation is this, to quit. To just say, man, I'm done. I don't want to work anymore. I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to trust anymore. I don't want to try and have courage anymore. I just want to be through with this. I tell you, don't quit. Don't fall into that way of thinking. In Psalms 37:34, it says, wait for the Lord and keep his way, and he will exalt you to inherit the land. You wait for God. And as you wait for God, you keep his way. You live life the way he wants you to live it. And in the end, God will cause you to inherit the land. Okay, here's 4 takeaways from those middle years of Joshua's life. Vision for the future is this, is that vision is going to have moments of crisis. There will be days you will wake up and think, oh Lord, what in the world have I done? I remember when we opened the weekday preschool and we would poured everything that we had into it. Some 9 years ago, I woke up in the middle of the night. I said, oh Lord, what have I done? I mean, out of a dead sleep, because there's just a moment of crisis is going to happen in your life. I tell you it will. Listen, Joshua had been Moses' right-hand man for 40 plus years. God didn't come to Joshua and say, listen, hey, Moses is going to die. I just kind of want you to get emotionally prepared for this, okay? Just kind of thinking about, you can have that last conversation with him, have some closure. That's not how it happened. Moses died. God came to Joshua and said, all right, man, it's time to go. There was a crisis of faith in his life with this vision of what the future could be. There's going to be crisis in your life. Get ready for it. Have the courage and the faith to walk through that time. And so that's what you need to know about the vision for your future. Now, depending on what season you're in life, maybe because of your age or because of maybe a season is coming to a close for you right now, you're going to have this last one is a vision to finish what you have started. To finish it. If you go back over to chapter 1 in Joshua, it says, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, arise and go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel, every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I have promised to Moses. Listen, I mean, he had to finish the vision that God had begun. And he was 85 years old. So I don't know how many of y'all in here are older, but listen, the most significant work of Joshua's life was done in the last 25 years of his life. You get to be my age in your 40s or you're in your 50s, you're thinking, man, this is the most significant thing I've ever done in my whole life. But that is not necessarily true. You follow God, you walk with God, it may be the last 25 years that God places upon you the greatest blessing, expectation, stress, burden, whatever you want to call it, but you see God work more in the last 25 years of your life than you did for the beginning of your life. And so God wants you to have a vision to finish what he has started. Don't retire and quit. I will tell you that when you're 20, okay, so you don't take offense when you're 60. But don't retire and quit and just be done with God and go do whatever it is you want to do. God is he has a call on your life. Do not neglect that call on your life. Some things from here in this season in Joshua's life. You might be in the middle of a season of vision. Don't rush to get into another one. I'm guilty of that. You're in the middle of, man, looking forward to the future. You're trying to finish. No, you're still looking forward to the future. You're not trying to finish yet. You might be in the middle of, hey, I need to get some things straight in my life. I have this vision of being free from some stuff, and you want to be looking to the future. No, let's deal with this, and we'll talk about that. And so if you're in the middle of a season of vision, don't rush to get into the next one. The next thing is this, is that when you're in a season of vision, you might be enjoying it a whole lot. And just think, I don't want to leave this. I think about college sometimes high school. You know, it's like, I just don't want to leave. I just don't want to leave. I don't want to grow up. I don't want to do this. I don't want to have to go to school. I don't want to have to get a job. I don't want to have to take on more responsibility. And you want to stay in a season. Listen, when God is calling you out of one season and into the next, go. Go. Because you'll be miserable if you don't. Feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall. But if you are in a season of finishing, like God has said, look, this is what I want you to do, and you've got this vision to finish well in your life, do it well. Enjoy it. Make the absolute most of the opportunities that God has given to you. So here's how I want to close. I want you to think about it. If you had to pick a season, which one are you in right now? Do you need to be in the season of a vision of freedom, like you've got some stuff, you just need to deal with this before we can talk about the future? If that's where you are, then remember, it is the Son that sets you free. He's it. That's it, okay? Or maybe you're in a season of looking forward to the future. And you're planning, you're thinking about it, this is where I'm going. Then just recognize what it is and go through and look at the takeaways of what is important about vision in that period of time in your life, and they will help you. That's why God gives you all this stuff. And then maybe you're in one of those seasons of finishing a season. It doesn't necessarily mean you're older. It just means you're at the end of one season. You're finishing it. Finish it well. Finish it well. Make the most of the opportunities that God has given to you. Let me pray for you.